Marcus Kane built an empire on blood and silence, commanding Chicago's underworld with an iron fist for 15 years. But tonight, as rain hammers against the windows of his penthouse office, he stares at bankruptcy papers that will dissolve everything he created. The feds, rival families, betrayals, all converge to break him. His hand trembles over the pen when the door opens. A waitress from the diner across the street walks in, rain-soaked and breathless, clutching a leather journal he's never seen before. "Before you sign that," she says, her voice cutting through the storm, "you need to know what your father really did the night he died. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from." The city of Chicago wore November like a funeral suit. Gray, cold, and unforgiving. Marcus Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on the 42nd floor of the Blackstone Tower, watching the evening traffic crawl through the loop below like luminous insects. Rain streaked the glass, fragmenting the lights of the city into 1,000 bleeding stars. He pressed his palm against the cold surface, feeling the vibration of the building, the pulse of a metropolis that had made him and was now ready to unmake him. Behind him, spread across the mahogany desk his grandfather had brought from Sicily in 1947, lay the instrument of his destruction, bankruptcy documents, each page a white flag of surrender. 23 pages. He had counted them 3 times. 23 pages to erase 15 years of blood, strategy, and the kind of power that made politicians return his calls and federal prosecutors look the other way, until they didn't. Marcus was 42 years old, though the mirror suggested older. His face carried the topography of his choices, a scar threading through his left eyebrow from a Detroit negotiation gone wrong, permanent shadows beneath eyes that had witnessed too many things that couldn't be unseen, and a hardness around his mouth that made smiling feel like a foreign language. He kept his dark hair cut short, almost military in its precision, and favored charcoal suits tailored on Savile Row, the kind of armor that announced authority before he spoke a word. The office reflected the man, expensive but not ostentatious, powerful but controlled. Original artwork, a Hopper, 2 Rothkos, hung on walls painted a deep navy that absorbed light rather than reflected it. The furniture was mid-century modern, all clean lines and leather the color of dried blood. No family photographs, no personal effects, nothing that could be used as leverage, as sentiment, as weakness. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It would be Carlotti, his consigliere, calling for the 5th time in an hour. Or maybe Teresa, his sister, who had stopped speaking to him after the indictments, but who would want to gloat now that everything was collapsing. Or worse, it could be Sarah, his ex-wife, calling from their house in Evanston, the house she kept after the divorce, along with most of his legitimate assets and any illusions he'd had about trust. The rain intensified, hammering the windows with a sound like distant applause. Through the distortion of water, Marcus could see the diner across the street, its neon sign flickering red and blue. Rose's 24-hour. He had eaten there exactly once, 3 years ago, when a meeting had run late and he'd needed coffee strong enough to strip paint. He remembered harsh fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, and a waitress with knowing eyes who had poured his coffee without asking how he took it. Black, no sugar. She'd known. The door to his office opened without a knock. Only 2 people had that privilege, Carlotti and his head of security, Vincent. It was Vincent, 6'4" of former Army Ranger, his face impassive as carved granite. "Sir, we've swept the building again. No surveillance, no feds in the vicinity. Petrov's people pulled back an hour ago." Marcus nodded. Dmitry Petrov, the Russian who had been circling his territory like a shark since the federal investigation began, waiting for the exact moment to strike. The bankruptcy would be blood in the water. By tomorrow morning, Petrov would move on the warehouses in Cicero, the gambling operations in Bridgeport, the trucking contracts that were the hidden skeleton of the empire. And there was nothing Marcus could do about it because the feds had frozen everything. Every account, every asset, every avenue of leverage. "Vincent," Marcus said, his voice low and rough from too many years of cigars and whiskey. "When this is done, when I sign these papers, you're released from your contract. Full severance, recommendation letters, whatever you need." Vincent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, it's not a discussion. You've got a daughter at Northwestern. Criminology, right? She doesn't need her father's name attached to a sinking ship. Vincent stood silent for a long moment, then nodded once and left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Alone again, Marcus returned to the desk. He sat in the leather chair that had cost more than most people's cars and pulled the documents closer. His lawyer, a vicious little ferret named Goldstein who charged $800 an hour, had flagged each signature line with yellow tabs. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. Acknowledge the complete dissolution of everything you built. The pen was a Mont Blanc, a gift from his father 20 years ago, back when the old man still believed Marcus could be something other than what he'd become. "You've got a good mind, Mark," his father had said, the whiskey making him sentimental. "You could have been a lawyer, a businessman, something clean." But clean didn't pay for his father's medical bills when the cancer came. Clean didn't protect his sister from her abusive husband. Clean didn't build empires. Marcus uncapped the pen. The nib gleamed in the lamplight, gold and sharp. He positioned it above the first signature line, feeling the weight of capitulation, of failure, of the end of the world as he knew it. His hand was steady. Whatever else could be said about Marcus Kane, he didn't tremble when faced with consequences. The rain hammered harder, and through its percussion, he heard something else. Footsteps in the hallway, moving fast. Too light to be Vincent. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward the Glock taped beneath the desk drawer. Muscle memory from 15 years of survival. The door burst open. A woman stumbled in, rain-soaked and breathing hard, her hair plastered to her face in dark ribbons. She wore the unmistakable uniform of Rose's diner, black pants, white shirt, the shirt transparent now from the rain, a name tag barely visible. Elena, the waitress, the one with the knowing eyes. Marcus's hand closed around the Glock's grip but didn't draw it. "How did you get up here?" She ignored the question. Her gaze locked on the document spread across his desk. In her hands, clutched against her chest like a shield, was a leather journal, water-damaged and old, its edges worn soft with time. "Before you sign those papers," she said, her voice carrying an urgency that cut through his surprise, "you need to know what your father really did the night he died." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him, the careful architecture of his reality shifting on foundations he'd thought were solid. His father had died of a heart attack 7 years ago, alone in his rent-controlled apartment on the South Side, a lifetime away from the son who had built an empire on principles the old man had despised. "My father's death has nothing to do with bankruptcy filings," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. Elena stepped closer, leaving wet footprints on the imported carpet, and placed the journal on the desk between them. It landed with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence. "Your father kept records," she said. "Every payment, every deal, every person who owed him. Not your deals. His. From before you took over. From before you even knew what he really did." Marcus stared at the journal as if it were a bomb. "My father was a bookkeeper for the Transit Authority. He worked 40 years pushing papers and retired on a pension that barely covered his rent." Elena's expression shifted, something like pity crossing her features, and Marcus hated her for it. "Is that what he told you?" She opened the journal, flipping to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The writing was his father's. He recognized the careful, precise script, the same handwriting that had labeled his school lunch bags and signed his report cards. "Read it." Against every instinct that told him to throw this woman out, to call Vincent, to sign the papers and end this nightmare of a day, Marcus pulled the journal closer and began to read. The entry was dated March 15th, 1998, 3 months before Marcus had taken his first steps into his father's world, without knowing it was already his world, his inheritance, his destiny written in his father's careful hand. The words marched across the page in neat columns, debits and credits, names and numbers, the skeleton of a shadow empire. Shipment received from Sullivan, $47,000. Paid Murphy for protection, $8,000. Meeting with Castellano regarding territory adjustment, favorable outcome. M's tuition paid in full. He doesn't ask where the money comes from. Better that way. The less he knows, the safer he stays. Marcus read the entry 3 times, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. Sullivan was Patrick Sullivan, the Irish boss who'd controlled the ports until a federal racketeering case had buried him in Marion Penitentiary for life. Murphy was Sean Murphy, a Chicago PD commander who'd eaten his service weapon in 2001 when internal affairs had gotten too close. Castellano, Vittorio Castellano, the old Don who'd ruled the Italian families with Renaissance brutality until a stroke had left him vegetative in a nursing home in Naperville. These weren't bookkeeper connections. These were the architecture of organized crime in Chicago in the late 90s, and his father's handwriting threaded through it like veins through marble. "This is impossible," Marcus said, but the words felt hollow. He flipped forward, pages rustling beneath his fingers, revealing years of his father's secret life. Payments to judges, payoffs to union bosses, investments in legitimate businesses that laundered money with the precision of Swiss watchmakers. And running through it all, like a refrain in a dark song, references to M, Marcus himself, unknowing beneficiary of blood money. M graduated law school today, top of his class. He could be anything. I've made sure he has that choice. The costs don't matter. I'll pay them all. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a fault line in the foundation of everything he understood about his life. He'd gone to Northwestern Law on what he'd believed was a partial scholarship and his father's savings. He'd turned down the law degree after 1 year, because the work felt meaningless compared to the raw power of the streets, the immediate gratification of fear and respect. He'd thought it was rebellion. He'd thought he was choosing his own path. "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena moved to the window, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold that seemed to radiate from the glass. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 28, with the kind of face that suggested Eastern European ancestry, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes the color of smoke, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile for pleasure. "Your father came into Rosa's every Thursday night for 3 years before he died. Always ordered the same thing, black coffee and cherry pie. Always left a $20 tip on a $6 check. He talked to me. Not about the weather or sports. About real things. About regrets." Marcus stood, the movement sharp and sudden, sending his chair rolling back. "My father barely said 10 words a day. He certainly didn't confide in waitresses." "Maybe you didn't know him as well as you thought," Elena said, meeting his anger with a calmness that was somehow more infuriating than confrontation. "The week before he died, he gave me this journal, told me to keep it safe, told me that if anything happened to you, if you ever faced ruin, I should make sure you knew the truth. He said you'd built your empire thinking you were becoming something he despised, but really, you were just walking in footsteps he'd already laid down." The rain had softened to a steady whisper against the glass, and through it, the city lights blurred into abstract art. Marcus felt untethered, as if the gravity that had held him to earth for 42 years had suddenly failed. He turned back to the journal, flipping through pages at random, seeing his life refracted through his father's secret accounting. M got into trouble tonight. Bar fight in Wrigleyville. I called Donnelly. It's handled. No charges. M thinks he talked his way out of it. Doesn't know I've been paying Donnelly's mortgage for 5 years. M asked me for a loan today. Wants to invest in a business opportunity. I know what kind of opportunity. I know who he's meeting with. It's Carlotti's nephew. The Italians are pulling him in. My son is becoming what I built the foundation for him to be. I don't know if I'm proud or horrified. M's first collection job went well. He doesn't know I'm hearing about it from 3 different sources. He thinks he's being clever, being secretive. He's walking a path I paved 20 years ago. Every connection he makes, I made first. Every door that opens for him, I oiled the hinges. Is this legacy or curse? Marcus slammed the journal shut, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet office. Why now? Why wait 7 years? If he wanted me to know this, why not just tell me when he was alive? Elena finally turned from the window, and in the lamplight, Marcus saw tracks of tears on her face that hadn't been there before. Because he was ashamed. Because he loved you enough to build you an empire but hated himself for doing it. Because he knew that if you learned the truth, you'd see yourself differently, and he couldn't bear to watch that happen. And you? Marcus stepped closer to her, invading the space between them with the kind of aggressive proximity he used to intimidate, to dominate. What's your stake in this? What does a waitress care about a dead man's regrets? She didn't step back. He paid for my sister's hospital bills. Leukemia, 2 years of treatment, bone marrow transplant, experimental drugs, $600,000 that insurance wouldn't cover. Your father gave it to me in cash, $20,000 at a time, and never asked for anything back. He said he knew what it was like to watch someone you love suffer because you couldn't afford to save them. He said he'd made his choices so you'd never have to know that feeling. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother. She died when he was 16, after years of declining health that the doctors had called chronic fatigue syndrome and depression, but that had really been slow starvation of the spirit by poverty. He'd never known why his father had seemed so defeated after, so hollowed out, so determined to push Marcus toward success at any cost. Now he knew. The cost had been everything: morality, legality, the clean life his father had preached while secretly living its opposite. And Marcus had inherited that cost without knowing it, had built his empire thinking he was rebelling against his father's weakness, when really he'd been fulfilling his father's design. The phone buzzed again. This time Marcus answered. Carlotti's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Boss, we've got a problem. Petrov's moving faster than expected. He's hitting the warehouse in Cicero right now. 17 of our guys, weapons drawn. It's about to turn into a war zone." Marcus looked at the bankruptcy papers, still waiting for his signature. Then at the journal, its leather covered dark with rain and secrets. Then at Elena, this stranger who held pieces of his history he hadn't known existed. "Tell our guys to stand down," Marcus said. "Let Petrov have the warehouse. Boss, I said stand down. I'm not spending life in prison over a building full of stolen electronics." He ended the call and turned back to Elena. "This journal. What else is in it?" She moved to the desk, flipping to pages near the end. Names. People your father loaned money to. People who owed him favors. People he helped when they had nowhere else to turn. It's not just criminal connections. It's teachers, nurses, small business owners, people who needed help and got it from a man who lived 2 lives. Marcus scanned the pages, seeing names he recognized and dozens he didn't. Amounts ranging from $500 to $50,000. No interest rates. No repayment schedules. Just dates and names and cryptic notes. For granddaughter's surgery. For fire damage restoration. For legal defense. He was a loan shark with a conscience, Marcus said, the irony bitter on his tongue. He was a complicated man who did questionable things for what he thought were the right reasons, Elena corrected. Just like you. The comparison stung, because it was true. Marcus had always told himself that his criminal empire served a purpose, that he provided services people wanted, that he employed people who couldn't get legitimate work, that he operated by a code even if the code existed outside the law. But really, he'd just been his father's son, walking in predetermined footsteps, building on a foundation laid in secret. The rain had stopped, and in its absence, the city sounds filtered through the window. Sirens in the distance, the rumble of the L train, the 1,000 small noises of Chicago at night. Marcus stood at a crossroads he hadn't known existed 30 minutes ago. Sign the papers and accept dissolution, or these people in the journal, he said slowly, an idea forming like crystals in a supersaturated solution. The ones who owed my father. Do those debts transfer? Elena's eyes narrowed. Legally? Morally? Or practically? Practically. A strange expression crossed her face, hope mixed with wariness, like watching a dangerous animal show an unexpected moment of gentleness. Your father never collected. He gave money and marked people's names down, but he never asked for repayment. The debts exist, but only as records of his generosity. Marcus picked up the journal again, his mind racing through possibilities. 23 pages of bankruptcy documents versus decades of his father's careful record-keeping. An empire built on fear and force versus a network built on obligation and gratitude. The old way versus something new. I need to make some calls, he said. Marcus spent the next 3 hours making the kind of calls that redrew maps. Not the maps that showed territory and profit margins, the old architecture of his crumbling empire, but the hidden maps his father had drawn in the journal, networks of human obligation that ran through Chicago like mycelium through soil, invisible but everywhere. The first call went to Dr. Raymond Chen, a cardiovascular surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, whose name appeared in the journal with a notation, covered malpractice settlement out of court, $120,000. His career saved. 04/17/2002. Marcus explained who he was, what he needed. Not money, but information, connections, introductions to the hospital board members who controlled medical equipment contracts. Dr. Chen listened in silence, then said, Your father never asked me for anything. I've been waiting 17 years to repay that debt. What do you need? The second call went to Maria Gonzalez, who owned 4 laundromats in Pilsen, and whose journal entry read, Building fire, Insurance denied claim. Gave $35,000 for rebuild. 03/2004. She wept on the phone. Said she'd thought about Marcus's father every day since he died. Had tried to pay the money back, but never got an address. Never knew how to reach him. "I'm successful now," she said. "Tell me what you need." The pattern repeated through the night. Marcus worked his way through the journal's later pages, calling people his father had helped when they were desperate, people who had rebuilt their lives on foundations of secret generosity. A defense attorney who'd gotten money to fight a wrongful conviction. A restaurant owner whose business had been saved from bankruptcy. A teacher who'd received funds for her son's autism therapy. Each one answered. Each one listened. Each one was ready to help. Elena sat in the chair across from his desk, watching this transformation with an expression Marcus couldn't read. She'd accepted his offer of dry clothes, an old Northwestern sweatshirt from his gym bag and a pair of sweatpants that were comically large on her small frame, and had pulled her wet hair back into a severe ponytail that made her look even younger. Between calls, she'd made coffee in his office's small kitchen, the expensive Italian espresso machine producing something that smelled like salvation. "You're not calling in debts," she observed after he'd finished the call with Maria Gonzalez. "You're building something." Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the exhaustion of the day like weights strapped to his bones. "My father built it. I'm just discovering the blueprints. What's the plan? You can't run a criminal empire on goodwill and gratitude." "No," Marcus agreed, "but I can build a legitimate one." He turned his laptop around to show her what he'd been drafting between calls. Articles of incorporation for a new entity. Kane Legacy Holdings. Not a crime syndicate, but a venture capital firm. A business consulting agency. A network of legitimate enterprises funded by the very people his father had helped decades ago. Dr. Chen would bring hospital contracts. Maria Gonzalez and other business owners would provide retail partnerships. The attorney would offer legal services. Each piece small enough to be unremarkable, but together forming something substantial. "The feds froze your criminal assets," Elena said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But they can't touch money that never belonged to you in the first place. These people aren't repaying you. They're investing in a new company that just happens to be run by you." "Exactly. And it's all clean. Every dollar accounted for, every contract legitimate, every filing proper. The bankruptcy eliminates the criminal empire, but this," he gestured at the journal, at the growing list of names and commitments, "this becomes something new." The office door opened without knocking. Vincent appeared, his expression grim. "Sir, we have a situation. Petrov didn't just take the Cicero warehouse. He's moved on 3 more locations. The betting parlor in Bridgeport, the storage facility in Oak Park, and he's got guys outside the club in River North right now." Marcus felt the old anger rise, the instinct to respond with overwhelming force, to meet aggression with greater aggression. It was the response his empire had been built on, the only language the criminal world understood. But he forced himself to breathe, to think past the impulse. "Let him have them," Marcus said. Vincent's jaw dropped. "Sir, if we don't respond, we look weak. Every crew from Gary to Milwaukee will think they can take pieces. Vincent, I'm signing the bankruptcy papers. By tomorrow morning, there won't be an empire to defend. Petrov can have the ashes. Let him fight the feds for territory that's more liability than asset at this point." Vincent looked like he wanted to argue, but years of following orders won out. He nodded stiffly and left, confusion evident in every line of his body. "You're really doing this," Elena said. It wasn't a question. "The alternative is spending the next decade fighting federal charges, hemorrhaging money to lawyers, watching everything decay from the inside while rats like Petrov feast on the corpse. This way, I end it on my terms and start something different. Your father would be proud," Elena said softly. Marcus wasn't sure about that. The journal suggested a man torn between pride and horror at what his son had become, even as he'd paved the way for that becoming. But maybe this pivot, this transformation, was what his father had hoped for all along, that Marcus would eventually see past the immediate power of the criminal life to something more sustainable, more legitimate, more legacy than empire. The calls continued through the small hours of the morning. Some people in the journal were dead, others had moved away, but enough remained to form the skeleton of something new. By 4 a.m., Marcus had commitments for nearly $2 million in seed capital for Kane Legacy Holdings, along with contracts, partnerships, and introductions that would give the new company immediate legitimacy in Chicago's business community. Carlotti called at 4:30, his voice thick with betrayal. "I'm hearing things, Marcus. Hearing you're dismantling everything we built. Hearing you're going legitimate. Tell me it's not true." Marcus chose his words carefully. Carlotti had been with him for 12 years, a friend as much as an employee, but friendship had limits in their world. "The feds have won, Carlotti. The empire is dead. This is me salvaging what I can and moving into legal territory." "Legal." Carlotti spat the word like a curse. "You sound like a civilian, like you've forgotten who you are." "Maybe I'm remembering who I was supposed to be." "Your father." "My father built the foundation for all of this," Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. "He just did it quietly, in ways I never knew about, and he hoped I'd eventually build something better than what he started. That's what I'm doing." Silence on the line, heavy and judgmental. Then, "You're on your own, Marcus. I can't follow you into this corporate bullshit. I'm meeting with Castellano's nephew in the morning. He's taking over the territories you're abandoning. At least he understands loyalty." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down, feeling the weight of the severed connection. Carlotti was the third defection of the night. 2 of his crew chiefs had also called to announce they were moving to other organizations, unwilling to wait around while Marcus pivoted into legitimacy. He couldn't blame them. The criminal world didn't value transformation. It valued consistency, predictability, the reliable exercise of force. Elena brought him more coffee, this one with milk and sugar without asking his preference. Somehow she'd known he needed it sweet. "You're losing people," she observed. "The people I'm losing couldn't come where I'm going anyway. Criminal enterprises and legitimate businesses don't mix well. Clean break is better." "Is it?" She sat on the edge of his desk, close enough that he could smell the rain still lingering in her hair, mixed with coffee and something else. Vanilla, maybe, or honey. "You're giving up everything you spent 15 years building. I'm trading it for something that won't land me in federal prison. That's not giving up. That's evolution." She studied him with those smoke-colored eyes, and Marcus felt exposed in a way he hadn't since Sarah had left, taking with her the last illusions that anyone could truly know him. "You didn't become a criminal because you loved the power," Elena said slowly, as if working through a complex equation. "You became one because you thought that's what strength looked like, what protection looked like. You were wrong, but at least you were trying to be something." The observation hit closer to truth than Marcus was comfortable with. "And what am I trying to be now?" "Your father's son," she said simply. "The version he hoped you'd become." Outside, dawn was breaking over Chicago, turning the sky from black to charcoal to slate. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbling through streets, early trains carrying workers to jobs, the great mechanism of legitimate commerce grinding into motion. Marcus had lived in this city his entire life, but had operated in its shadows, in the spaces between laws where power was measured in fear and money. Now he was stepping into the light, and it felt simultaneously like redemption and exile. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen, his father's gift, and pulled the bankruptcy papers close one final time. 23 pages, the death certificate of everything he'd been. He signed each one with swift, decisive strokes, feeling both the grief of ending and the strange lightness of release. "It's done," he said, setting the pen down. "The empire is officially dissolved." Elena smiled for the first time since she'd burst into his office, and it transformed her face from pretty to something luminous. "No," he said. "The old empire is dissolved. The new one is just beginning." The Chicago office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation occupied a brutalist concrete structure on West Roosevelt Road that looked exactly like what it was, a place where hope went to die. Marcus walked through its doors at 9 a.m., the bankruptcy papers in a leather portfolio under his arm, Vincent trailing 3 steps behind like a particularly well-armed shadow. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was voluntarily entering a building he'd spent 15 years avoiding, but legitimacy required submission to systems he'd previously operated outside of. Special Agent Victoria Chen, no relation to Dr. Raymond Chen. She'd made that clear during the investigation. Waited in a conference room on the 4th floor. She was in her early 40s, wearing a navy pantsuit that probably cost 1/10 of what Marcus's suit cost, but fit her with the precision of someone who understood that authority came from competence, not decoration. Her black hair was pulled back in a bun, tight enough to give Marcus a sympathetic headache, and her eyes were the flat, assessing brown of someone who'd seen too many criminals try to charm their way past consequences. "Mr. Kane," she said, not offering her hand. "I'll admit, When you requested this meeting, I thought you were coming to negotiate. Criminals usually negotiate. I'm not negotiating, Marcus said, setting the portfolio on the conference table. I'm notifying you that I'm signing voluntary bankruptcy papers for all entities associated with my previous business operations. Every asset, every holding, every account, surrendered to federal oversight for liquidation and victim restitution. Agent Chen opened the portfolio, her expression shifting from skepticism to confusion as she scanned the documents. You're dissolving everything? Voluntarily? Completely? I'm also providing a full accounting of all operations for the past 5 years, locations of all physical assets, and personnel lists. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and placed it on the table like a white flag. Everything you've been investigating is on that drive. Names, dates, amounts. Full cooperation. In exchange for what? Immunity? Witness protection? Reduced charges? Marcus shook his head. Nothing. I'm not asking for anything except that you process these papers quickly so I can move forward with new, legitimate business ventures. Agent Chen sat back in her chair, and for the first time since Marcus had met her 18 months ago when the investigation began, she looked genuinely off balance. Mr. Kane, people don't just hand over criminal empires without wanting something in return. What's the angle? The angle is that I'm done. The cost of maintaining what I built exceeded its value. I'm choosing a different path. Just like that, 15 years of racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and you're just walking away? Not walking away. Running toward something different. He pulled out his phone and showed her the incorporation documents for Kane Legacy Holdings. This is a legitimate venture capital firm, properly registered, fully compliant with all federal and state regulations. It launches next week. I'm investing in small businesses, providing consulting services, operating entirely above board. Agent Chen studied the documents, her lawyer's eye catching every detail. Seed capital comes from where? Private investors who are repaying old debts to my father. Nothing criminal, nothing laundered. Every dollar is clean and documented. You're welcome to audit everything. Oh, we will, she assured him. If this is some elaborate shell game, it's not. I'm tired, Agent Chen. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of violence. Tired of being the person I became. This is me trying to be someone different before it's too late. She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus met her gaze without flinching. Whatever she saw, there seemed to satisfy something because she nodded slowly. I'll expedite the bankruptcy filing, and I'll be watching your new venture very closely. One misstep, one hint of criminal activity, and I'll bury you so deep, you'll need archaeology to find your way out. Understood. As Marcus left the FBI building, the November sun broke through the clouds, casting harsh shadows across Roosevelt Road. Vincent fell into step beside him, his expression troubled. Sir, was that wise? Giving them everything? It's the only way to truly leave it behind. Half measures just drag the past into the future. Clean break is the only option. They drove back to the Blackstone Tower in silence, Vincent's tension radiating like heat. When they pulled into the private garage, Vincent finally spoke. I've been thinking about your offer. The severance, the recommendation. I'm going to take it. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not quite grief, but a recognition of endings. Your daughter will be proud, maybe. Or maybe she'll think I'm a coward for walking away when things got hard. Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel. But I've seen too many guys stay too long, end up dead or in prison, their families destroyed. You're giving me an exit. That's a gift. You earned it. 12 years of loyalty counts for something. Vincent nodded, and for a moment, the professional distance between them collapsed, revealing the simple human connection beneath. For what it's worth, sir, I think what you're doing takes more courage than anything we did in the old life. It's easy to be dangerous. It's hard to be decent. The observation stayed with Marcus as he rode the elevator back to his penthouse office. The space looked different in daylight, less like a command center and more like what it really was. An expensive room where a man had isolated himself from consequence until consequence had found him anyway. Elena was still there, curled in one of the leather chairs by the window, the journal open in her lap. She'd changed back into her diner uniform, the shirt dry now, her name tag catching the sunlight. How did it go? She asked. The empire is officially dead. Long live, whatever comes next. She closed the journal and stood, moving to the window where she stood haloed in morning light. I should get back to the diner. Rosa's been texting. She thinks I got murdered. "Elena," Marcus said, and she turned to face him. "Why did you really keep that journal? For 7 years you could have thrown it away, could have forgotten about my father's request. Why honor a promise to a dead man?" Her expression softened, and in that softness Marcus saw grief that mirrored his own. "Because he was kind to me when kindness was rare. Because he saved my sister's life and never made me feel like I owed him. Because he talked to me like I was a person, not just a waitress. And because on his last visit to the diner, he looked at me and said, 'My son is going to need help someday. And when he does, you'll know. Give him the journal and tell him I was proud of him even when I couldn't say it.'" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father, dying and still trying to save him, still paving roads his son might someday travel. He never said he was proud when he was alive. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the gap between what he'd done and what he'd hoped you'd be was too wide to bridge with words. So he built you a different bridge. That journal, those connections, the foundation for something better. Marcus walked to the window and stood beside her, looking down at the diner across the street where his father had spent Thursday nights for 3 years, eating pie and planning his son's salvation. "I need someone I can trust in this new venture. Someone who isn't connected to the old world. Someone who sees past what I was to what I'm trying to become." Elena turned to face him, her expression wary. "Marcus, I need a partner. Not muscle, not an enforcer. A real partner. Someone with perspective, with humanity, with the ability to see people instead of assets." He met her eyes, letting her see the sincerity beneath the request. "You said you've been waiting 7 years to fulfill your promise to my father. Help me build something he'd actually be proud of. I'm a waitress. I dropped out of DePaul after 2 years. I don't have business experience or connections or... You have something better. You have compassion. You kept a promise to a dead man for 7 years. You walked into a crime boss's office in the middle of the night to save him from making a terrible mistake. Those are the qualities I need. Everything else can be learned." She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt the weight of her assessment. This woman who'd appeared like a ghost bearing messages from his father. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but not because I think you're some reformed criminal with a heart of gold. Because I think you're genuinely trying to become something different, and that deserves support. And because your father asked me to help you, and I don't break promises to dead men." "Fair enough." They shook hands, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small, and Marcus felt the first genuine optimism he'd experienced in months. Not the adrenaline-fueled high of criminal success, but something quieter and more sustainable. Hope. His phone rang. Carlotti's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus answered, expecting more recrimination. Instead, Carlotti's voice was tight with panic. "Marcus, we have a serious problem. I'm at the warehouse in Cicero. Petrov's guys, they're all dead. Every single one. Execution style. And someone left a message written in blood on the wall. Haynes' empire doesn't transfer. It ends." Marcus felt ice flow through his veins. "Who? We don't know. But it's someone who doesn't want Petrov taking over your territory. Someone who thinks your retirement means the whole criminal infrastructure should disappear. And Marcus, they left your name on the wall. The feds are going to think you did this, that the bankruptcy is a cover while you eliminate competition." The room tilted, all his careful plans suddenly precarious. Agent Chen would see this as exactly what Carlotti described. A false flag, a manipulation, proof that Marcus Kane couldn't be trusted. And maybe she'd be right. Maybe you couldn't really leave the criminal world. Maybe it followed you, stained you, destroyed everything you tried to build in daylight. Elena's hand on his arm brought him back. "What's wrong?" "Everything," Marcus said. "The past isn't done with me yet." The Cicero warehouse was a crime scene festooned with yellow tape and flashing lights by the time Marcus arrived, though he stayed 3 blocks away, watching through binoculars from the roof of a machine shop that belonged to one of his former associates. 11 ambulances, which meant 11 bodies, which meant Petrov's entire crew had been wiped out. Through the police radio scanner that Vincent had somehow procured in the 20 minutes since Carlotti's call, Marcus listened to the terse communications between officers as they processed what sounded like a massacre. Execution style, all of them. Professional work, no shell casings. Looks like they were lined up and shot one at a time. Message on the wall in what appears to be blood. Says, "Haynes' empire doesn't transfer. It ends. Get homicide down here, and someone call the FBI. This is organized crime jurisdiction." Marcus lowered the binoculars, feeling the trap closing around him. He'd voluntarily handed the feds everything, had signed papers dissolving his empire, had tried to walk away clean, and now someone was trying to make it look like that dissolution was cover for eliminating competition. Agent Chen would have federal marshals at his door within the hour. "We need to disappear," Vincent said. He'd driven Marcus here with the kind of tactical efficiency that came from years of military training, taking a route that avoided traffic cameras and kept them off main streets. "I can get you out of Chicago. Gary, Indiana has safe houses that aren't in any database. We can buy time to figure out who's setting you up. Running makes me look guilty. Staying makes you arrested. Pick your poison." Elena, who had insisted on coming despite Marcus's protests, leaned against the roof's access door with her arms crossed. "He's right. Whoever did this timed it perfectly. Right after you filed bankruptcy papers. Right after you gave the feds everything. They want you to look like you're consolidating power by eliminating Petrov." Marcus turned to face her. "You should leave. Get as far from me as possible before this contaminates you too." "Not happening. I signed on to help you build something legitimate. I didn't realize that would include murder investigations, but I'm not abandoning you at the first complication." She pushed off from the door and joined him at the roof's edge, looking down at the warehouse. Who benefits from destroying both you and Petrov? It was the right question, the one Marcus's mind had been circling since Carlotti's call. Whoever wants Chicago's criminal infrastructure completely dismantled. Petrov was moving in to take my territories. Someone doesn't want him to have them, but they also don't want me to retain them. They want the whole system to collapse. "A reformer?" Vincent suggested. "Some vigilante with delusions of cleaning up the city? Or someone positioning to rebuild everything from scratch?" Marcus countered. "Destroy the existing power structures, create chaos, then emerge as the solution. It's a classic play." His phone buzzed. Carlotti again. "Don't answer that," Vincent warned, but Marcus was already accepting the call. "Marcus, where are you?" Carlotti's voice was ragged with fear. "The feds just picked me up for questioning. They think I did this on your orders. They think the bankruptcy is theater, and you're actually eliminating competition. Where are they taking you?" "Roosevelt Road, FBI headquarters." "Marcus, I didn't do this. I swear on my daughter's life I had nothing to do with—" The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, calculations spinning through his mind. Carlotti picked up, which meant others would be too. His former crew chiefs, his associates, anyone connected to the dissolved empire. Agent Chen was moving fast, and she was moving hard. "We need to call her," Elena said. "Agent Chen, you need to tell her you didn't do this. She won't believe me. From her perspective, I have motive and opportunity. The fact that I voluntarily dissolved my empire doesn't eliminate me as a suspect. It makes me look smarter, like I'm playing chess while everyone else plays checkers." Vincent's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, his expression darkening with each second. When he hung up, he turned to Marcus with the look of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "That was my contact in CPD. They found your fingerprints at the scene. On the wall, next to the blood message." Impossible. Marcus hadn't been to the Cicero warehouse in 3 weeks. "They're fabricating evidence. Or someone collected your fingerprints and planted them. Either way, you're about to be arrested for multiple homicides. We need to move. Now." But Marcus's mind was already elsewhere, racing through the list of people who could have accessed his fingerprints. His office, his apartment, his car. Dozens of surfaces he touched daily, any of which could have been harvested by someone with the right tools and motivation. Someone close enough to have access, but distant enough to avoid suspicion. "Sarah," he said aloud, the name tasting like betrayal. His ex-wife, who had kept the house in Evanston along with most of his legitimate assets. Sarah, who had hired a forensic accountant during the divorce and had copies of everything. Keys, access codes, probably fingerprints lifted from wine glasses or door handles. Sarah, who had always resented that he'd pulled her into his world and then abandoned her when it became too dangerous. "Your ex-wife framed you for mass murder?" Elena's skepticism was evident. "That seems extreme even for a bitter divorce." "She didn't do it herself. But she could have provided access, information, cooperation." Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to Sarah's contact. They hadn't spoken in 8 months, not since the final divorce papers were signed. He called. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "She's not answering," Vincent observed, "which either means she's guilty and avoiding you, or she's already in danger because someone used her to get to you." The third option, the one Marcus didn't want to consider, was that Sarah was already dead, another body in a plan designed to destroy him completely. He called the house in Evanston, the landline that Sarah had insisted on keeping because she liked the permanence of it. It rang, and Marcus was about to hang up when someone answered. Not Sarah. A man's voice, unfamiliar and cold. "Mr. Kane, I was hoping you'd call." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Who is this? Where's Sarah? Your ex-wife is fine. Unconscious in her bedroom, but fine. She's served her purpose. The question now is whether you've understood yours. What do you want? I want what your father wanted, for you to leave the criminal life completely. He tried to build you an exit, tried to pave a road to legitimacy, but you're like all addicts. You can't really leave until everything is burned down, so I'm helping. You killed 11 people to help me? I killed 11 criminals who were positioning to rebuild your empire under new management. I'm sending a message to Chicago's underworld. The Kane era is over. No successors, no transfers of power, just ashes." Marcus's mind raced, trying to place the voice, the psychology behind it. "You know about my father's journal. You know about his plan." "How?" A pause, then. "Because I was there, Marcus. Every Thursday night at Rosa's diner, sitting 2 booths away, listening to your father pour his heart out to a waitress, hearing about his regrets, his hopes, his desperate wish that you'd become something better. I watched him die of a broken heart because his son chose violence over virtue, and I decided to finish what he started." The pieces clicked into place. "You're FBI. You were surveilling my father, thinking he was connected to my operations. You heard everything. Special Agent William Torres, retired. I spent 3 years investigating your father, convinced he was the key to bringing you down. Turned out he was just a sad old man who'd made terrible choices trying to protect his son. When he died, I thought about what he'd said, that you needed to lose everything before you could build something real. So, I waited. I watched. And when you finally filed those bankruptcy papers, I knew it was time to make sure the dissolution was permanent." Marcus felt rage building, the old instinct to respond to threats with overwhelming force. "You murdered 11 people. I eliminated 11 criminals who would have perpetuated the cycle. Think of it as urban renewal with a body count." Torres's voice was calm, almost pleasant, as if he were discussing gardening rather than murder. "And now you have a choice. You can try to fight this, try to prove your innocence, try to investigate, try to operate like the criminal you were. Or you can accept it. Let the feds chase shadows while you focus on building your legitimate enterprise. The investigation will eventually clear you when they can't find evidence connecting you to the actual murders. Your father's plan succeeds. You become clean. Chicago's criminal infrastructure collapses. Everyone wins. Except the 11 dead men. Who were criminals? Who chose that life? Who would have killed others without hesitation? Don't pretend moral superiority, Marcus. You've ordered deaths. You've caused suffering. This is just karma with better aim." Marcus looked at Elena and Vincent, both watching him with expressions mixing concern and anticipation. He was at a crossroads. Fight Torres, try to clear his name immediately, and risk destroying his new venture, or accept the agent's twisted logic and let the legal system slowly exonerate him while he built Kane Legacy Holdings into something real. "If I find out you hurt Sarah," Marcus began. "I told you, she's fine. Just insurance to make sure you made the smart choice. Walk away, Marcus. Build your father's dream. Let the old world burn." The call ended. Marcus stood on that Cicero rooftop as sirens wailed in the distance, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Torres was right about one thing. Fighting this would destroy any chance at legitimacy. The investigation would drag on for months, maybe years, consuming resources and attention. But accepting it meant letting a murderer walk free, meant allowing injustice to masquerade as righteousness. "What do we do?" Vincent asked. Marcus looked at Elena, this woman who'd appeared in his life like a message from the past, bearing his father's hopes. "We do what my father wanted. We build something legitimate, and we let the system handle Torres. But we do it smart. We document everything. We keep records. We make sure that when the truth comes out, and it will come out, we're positioned to survive it." "That's a hell of a gamble," Vincent said. "Everything worth building requires gambling on the future." Marcus pulled out his phone and called Agent Chen. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with anticipation. "Mr. Kane, I was about to send marshals to pick you up. I'm calling to surrender voluntarily. I'm at—" He glanced around, getting his bearings. "West 28th Street in Cicero. I'll wait here for your people. I didn't murder Petrov's crew, and I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. But I'm also telling you to look at former agent William Torres. He was surveilling my father years ago. He has motive and capability. Torres retired 6 years ago. Retired, not dead. Check his whereabouts. Check his financials. Check his mental state. Someone with FBI training executed 11 people to send me a message. I'm betting it was him. And why would he do that?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Because he wants my criminal empire to end completely, and he's willing to kill to make sure it happens. The question is whether you want to arrest the convenient suspect, or catch the actual murderer." Silence on the line. Chen's analytical mind working through possibilities. "Stay where you are. Marshals will be there in 10 minutes. If you run, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "I'm not running. I'm tired of running." The marshals arrived in 8 minutes, tactical and efficient, treating Marcus like the dangerous criminal he'd been rather than the reformed man he was trying to become. They cuffed him with practiced efficiency, read him rights he'd heard other people receive dozens of times, loaded him into an armored vehicle. Through the window, Marcus watched Chicago pass by, the city that had made him, that had shaped him, that was now either his redemption or his grave. Elena and Vincent followed in Vincent's car. Marcus watched them in the side mirror, 2 people who had no reason to believe in him, but who were choosing to anyway. Vincent, loyal to the end. Elena, honoring a promise to a dead man. Between them, maybe there was enough foundation to build something real. At FBI headquarters, they processed him with bureaucratic precision. Photographs, fingerprints, formal charging with 11 counts of first-degree murder. Agent Chen watched from behind one-way glass, her expression unreadable. When they finally brought him to an interrogation room, she sat across from him with a file folder thick as a phone book. "Tell me about William Torres," she said. So Marcus did. He told her about his father's Thursday nights at Rosa's, about the journal, about Torres's call. He told her everything, holding back nothing, because transparency was the only currency he had left. And as he spoke, he saw Chen's expression shift from skepticism to consideration to grim determination. "If you're lying," she said when he finished, "if this is misdirection, it's not. Check my phone records." The call came from Sarah's house. Check Torres's financial records. He'd need money to set this up. Check his whereabouts against the timeline. Find the truth. Chen stood, taking the folder with her. "You're being held without bail. Multiple homicides, flight risk, criminal history. You'll be in county lockup until we sort this out. Could be days, could be weeks. I understand." She paused at the door, turning back to face him. "For what it's worth, I believe you about the bankruptcy. I believe you're trying to go legitimate. But whether I believe you about Torres depends on evidence. Hope you're right, Mr. Kane, because if you're not, you'll die in prison." After she left, they transferred Marcus to Cook County Jail, processed him again, assigned him a cell in protective custody, because even a dissolved empire made enemies, and those enemies would love nothing more than to kill Marcus Kane while he was vulnerable. The cell was exactly what he expected. Gray walls, thin mattress, the smell of industrial cleaning solution trying to mask desperation. He lay on the bunk and stared at the ceiling, thinking about his father's journal, about Elena's arrival bearing messages from the dead, about Torres's twisted righteousness. Somewhere in this chaos was a path forward, but from where he lay, Marcus couldn't see it. He could only trust that the truth would emerge, that justice, however delayed, would eventually function. His father had believed in that, had built an exit for Marcus despite everything, had died hoping his son would find a better way. Now Marcus was in a cell, charged with murders he didn't commit, his fledgling legitimate enterprise in jeopardy before it had even begun. And yet, somehow, he felt more hopeful than he had in years, because he was finally fighting for something worth defending. Not territory or profit, but the chance to become someone different, someone better, someone his father could be proud of. The lights dimmed for evening count. Somewhere down the cell block, someone was crying. Someone else was praying. Marcus closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since his mother's funeral. He prayed too, not for rescue or redemption, but for strength to see this through to whatever end awaited, for wisdom to know the right path when it appeared, for the courage to become the man his father had hoped he'd be. even if that man had to be forged in the fire of false accusations and institutional injustice. Tomorrow, Elena and Vincent would start building Kane Legacy Holdings without him. Tomorrow, Agent Chen would investigate Torres. Tomorrow, the truth would begin its slow emergence from the lies surrounding it. But tonight, Marcus Kane slept in a cell, and for the first time in 15 years, he slept dreamlessly, the sleep of a man who had finally stopped running from himself. 3 weeks in Cook County Jail taught Marcus Kane more about patience than 15 years of criminal enterprise had taught him about power. The days blended together in a monotony of bad coffee, worse food, and the constant low-grade tension of men in cages. But Marcus used the time the way his father had taught him to use all resources, strategically. He read legal briefs that Elena brought during visits, studied business plans for Kane Legacy Holdings that Vincent smuggled in through channels Marcus preferred not to know about, and thought deeply about the architecture of the life he was trying to build. The breakthrough came on day 22. Agent Chen appeared at his cell at 6 a.m, her expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested significant news. "Get dressed. You're being released." Marcus sat up on the thin mattress, not quite believing. Torres is currently in federal custody, facing 11 counts of first-degree murder, plus additional charges for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and kidnapping. Chen waited while Marcus pulled on the street clothes he'd been arrested in, now wrinkled and stale. "Your phone records checked out. We traced the call to Sarah's landline, found Torres's DNA at the scene. Apparently, he's gotten sloppy in retirement, and his financials showed payments to a Serbian contractor with expertise in wet work. He didn't pull the triggers, but he orchestrated everything." They walked through the jail's processing area, guards stepping aside for Chen's FBI credentials. "Your ex-wife is fine, by the way. Mild concussion, traumatized, but physically unharmed. She's agreed to provide testimony about how Torres approached her 3 months ago, claiming he could protect her from your criminal associates if she cooperated. Is she being charged? Accessory after the fact, but the prosecutor is inclined toward leniency given the coercion involved. She'll probably get probation and community service." They emerged into the weak November sunlight, and Marcus paused on the jail steps, feeling the cold air on his face like absolution. Vincent and Elena waited by the curb in Vincent's car, and the sight of them, loyal, patient, still present despite everything, made something crack in Marcus's chest. Some final piece of armor he'd been carrying for decades. "Thank you," Marcus said to Chen, "for investigating instead of just accepting the easy answer. Don't thank me yet. You're cleared of the murders, but you're not clear. We'll be watching your new business venture very closely. One misstep, one indication that Kane Legacy Holdings is just a front for renewed criminal activity, and I'll bring the full weight of federal prosecution down on you. Understood?" "Understood." Chen handed him a business card with her direct number. "Your father was a complicated man. I read his journal as part of the investigation. He tried to build you something better, and I respect that. Don't waste his effort." She left in an unmarked sedan, and Marcus walked to Vincent's car. Elena burst out before he reached it, throwing her arms around him in a hug that was equal parts relief and exasperation. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of thinking you might spend the rest of your life in prison for something you didn't do. Marcus returned the hug awkwardly, unused to physical affection that wasn't transactional. "But I didn't." Torres confessed. "Bragged," Vincent corrected from the driver's seat. "Once they arrested him, he couldn't shut up. Talked about cleaning up Chicago, about finishing your father's work, about being a righteous instrument of justice." Complete psychological breakdown. They drove through the city Marcus had ruled and been ruled by, heading north toward the Blackstone Tower. The penthouse office felt different when Marcus entered it. Smaller, somehow, less imposing, more like what it had always been. Just a room with expensive furniture where a man had tried to be important. The bankruptcy papers were gone, processed by the federal system. The journal lay on his desk where he'd left it, his father's careful handwriting a roadmap to transformation. "What did I miss?" Marcus asked. Elena opened her laptop, and for the next 2 hours, she walked him through what Kane Legacy Holdings had become in his absence. 7 initial investments in small businesses, a laundromat chain expansion in Pilsen, a medical equipment contract facilitated by Dr. Chen, a restaurant franchise in Bridgeport, 3 consulting contracts providing business advisory services to entrepreneurs who had been part of his father's secret network of obligation, 2 partnerships with legitimate venture capital firms who saw potential in Marcus's unlikely pivot from crime boss to ethical businessman. "We're operating at a 23% profit margin," Elena said, her voice carrying genuine pride. Every transaction documented, every dollar accounted for, every filing submitted on time. The IRS has already audited us twice at the FBI's request. We passed both times. Marcus studied the spreadsheets, seeing his father's legacy transformed into something tangible and legal. And personnel? Who's working for us? Lean hires, Vincent answered. Business school graduates, experienced consultants, people with no connections to your previous operations. I'm handling security, but corporate security, background checks, fraud prevention, cybersecurity. No muscle, no enforcers, no street soldiers. What about your daughter? Vincent's face softened. She's proud of me. For the first time in 12 years, I can tell her exactly what I do for work without lying. That's worth more than any salary. The door opened, and Sarah walked in. Marcus stood abruptly, old instincts flaring, but she raised her hands in a gesture of peace. She looked tired, older than her 40 years, with bruises fading on her temple where Torres had struck her. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to apologize. You helped Torres frame me. He told me he was building a case against your competitors, that cooperating would keep me safe from retaliation when your empire collapsed. I was stupid and scared, and I gave him access to our old house, to your belongings, to anything he said he needed. I didn't know he was planning murder. Her voice cracked. I didn't know he was insane. Marcus studied her. This woman he'd married thinking love was enough to bridge the gap between who he was and who he pretended to be. What do you want, Sarah? To invest in Kane Legacy Holdings. I still have assets from the divorce. Legitimate money, clean money. Let me put it into your new company. Let me be part of building something good from all the wreckage. Elena and Vincent exchanged glances, leaving the decision to Marcus. He thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about the fact that his entire transformation was premised on the belief that people could change. 10% equity stake for a $200,000 investment. You serve on the advisory board but have no operational control, and you attend therapy twice a week to process the trauma Torres inflicted. Those are my terms. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for being better than I thought you could be. After she left with paperwork to sign, Elena turned to Marcus with an expression mixing admiration and exasperation. You just gave your ex-wife who helped frame you for murder a seat at the table. I gave someone who made a mistake under duress a chance at redemption. If I can change, she can change. Hell, if Torres hadn't completely lost his mind, maybe even he could have changed. People are more complicated than the worst things they've done. That's very evolved for a former crime boss. My father had 20 years to evolve. I'm just trying to catch up. They spent the afternoon meeting with the initial investors, the people from the journal who had built their own successes on foundations of his father's generosity. Maria Gonzalez brought her husband and showed Marcus photos of her expanded laundromat chain. Dr. Chen introduced Marcus to 3 colleagues who were interested in the medical consulting services Kane Legacy provided. A defense attorney named Rodriguez spoke about using his profits to create a nonprofit providing legal services to immigrants. Each conversation reinforced the same truth. His father had planted seeds decades ago that were now flowering into something larger than any one person. The criminal empire Marcus had built had been about control, about forcing outcomes through fear and violence. This legitimate enterprise was about facilitation, about helping people build their own success, and sharing in the rising tide. It was slower, less dramatic, harder to quantify in terms of immediate power, but it was sustainable in ways the old life never could have been. As evening fell over Chicago, Marcus stood at the window of his office, soon to be former office, as Kane Legacy was moving to smaller, less ostentatious space in the Loop, and watched the city lights come on like a constellation being born. Elena joined him, 2 coffee cups in hand, offering him one without asking if he wanted it. She'd learned his preferences over 3 weeks of jail visits, had become his partner in the truest sense, someone who anticipated needs and filled gaps without being asked. What are you thinking? She asked. That my father spent 20 years trying to build me an exit from a life I didn't know I was already in, that he died thinking he'd failed, and that somehow, through the worst timing and the strangest circumstances, he actually succeeded. He'd be proud, Elena said, of all of this. Of you. Marcus shook his head. I don't know about proud, but maybe satisfied, maybe at peace knowing that the foundation he laid didn't crumble the moment he was gone. What happens now? Now we work, we build, we help other people build, we operate with transparency and integrity, And we prove that transformation isn't just theoretical, it's possible, even for people like me who spent 15 years doing terrible things for complicated reasons. Elena sipped her coffee, and in the reflection of the window, Marcus saw her smile. That's a good mission statement. We should put it in the company literature. Probably leave out the part about terrible things. Probably. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Chicago breathe and shift below them. Somewhere in this city, Torres was in a federal holding cell, his righteousness revealed as psychosis. Somewhere, Petrov's organization was scrambling to reorganize after 11 executions. Somewhere, the old criminal infrastructure was adapting to the vacuum Marcus's dissolution had created, but those were someone else's problems now. Marcus had spent 15 years being part of Chicago's underworld, shaping it and being shaped by it. Now he was stepping into a different role. Not ruler, but participant. Not crime boss, but businessman trying to do right in a world that made doing right incredibly difficult. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister Teresa, who he hadn't heard from in 3 years. Saw the news about your release. About what you're building. Dad would have loved this. I'd like to talk, if you're open to it. Marcus showed the text to Elena. Family reconciliation. That's good, right? Terrifying and necessary, she said. Like everything worth doing. He typed a response. Coffee tomorrow? Rose's Diner, 9 a.m.? The reply came instantly. I'll be there. Rose's Diner, where his father had spent Thursday nights for 3 years, eating pie and planning salvation. Where Elena had worked and listened and kept promises to dead men. Where Marcus would sit tomorrow with the sister he'd driven away through his choices and try to rebuild something more fundamental than any business. Family. Vincent knocked on the door, then entered carrying a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. I thought we should mark the occasion. First successful month of Kane Legacy Holdings. 0 felonies committed. That's got to be a personal record. They laughed, the sound surprising in its genuineness, and Marcus poured champagne into glasses his criminal empire had purchased, but his legitimate one would sell off. They toasted to new beginnings, to second chances, to the strange and circuitous paths that led people from darkness into light. As midnight approached, Marcus sat at his desk one final time and opened his father's journal to the last page. The final entry was dated 3 days before his father's death, and Marcus had avoided reading it until now, afraid of what final judgment it might contain. But he was ready now. He was ready to know. M called today, asked if I was proud of him. I told him I was, and I meant it, even though the things I'm proud of aren't the things he thinks. I'm proud that he's survived in a world that devours most people. I'm proud that beneath the hardness there's still capacity for love. I'm proud that he's my son, even though my choices made him what he is. If he ever reads this, I hope he knows. The empire doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that he finds a way to be whole, to be human, to build something that lasts beyond violence. I've given him the tools. I've laid the foundation. The rest is up to him. Be brave, Marcus. Be better than I was. Build something worthy of the pain it took to make you. I believe you can. I believe you will. I love you, Dad. Marcus closed the journal, his vision blurred, his throat tight with grief and gratitude intertwined. His father had believed in him when belief seemed impossible, had built an escape route from a prison Marcus hadn't known he was in, had loved him enough to create possibility, even from beyond death. Thank you, Marcus whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of the man who had shaped him in ways he was only now beginning to understand. I'll make you proud, I promise. I'll build something worthy. Outside, Chicago continued its endless cycle. Crimes committed and solved, businesses opening and closing, people being born and dying, the great mechanism of urban life grinding forward without pause. But in one office on the 42nd floor of the Blackstone Tower, a man who had been a criminal for 15 years took his first genuine steps toward becoming something different. Not innocent. He could never be that, but perhaps eventually redeemed. Marcus Kane stood at the window one last time, looking at the city that had made him and that he was now choosing to join as a participant rather than a predator. Tomorrow, he would move to new offices. Tomorrow, he would have coffee with his sister. Tomorrow, Kane Legacy Holdings would sign 3 new contracts and help 4 small businesses expand. Tomorrow, the work of transformation would continue. But tonight, he mourned the father who had saved him and celebrated the life that salvation had made possible. Tonight, he stood between who he'd been and who he was becoming. balanced on a knife's edge between past and future. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Kane felt something approaching peace. The rain started again, gentle this time, washing the streets below, and in its percussion against the windows, Marcus heard his father's voice. Be brave. Be better. Build something worthy. I will, Marcus said to the rain, to the city, to the ghost of the man who had loved him enough to build bridges between darkness and light. I promise. I will. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more compelling narratives like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what resonated most with you about Marcus's journey. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful stories of transformation, redemption, and second chances. Thank you for listening.